Hello, my dear lore seekers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories. Tonight, we delve into a moment of profound and irreversible change. A decision born of fear and desperation that would forever alter the course of history. We will journey to a time when the line between the magical and the mundane was not yet drawn. An era of open secrets and simmering conflict. Settle in, find your comfort, and let the world outside fade away as we uncover the story of the International Statute of Secrecy, the day magic went into hiding. Before the late 17th century, the wizarding world was a place of open secrets. The boundary between the magical and the Muggle was not a hard line, but a porous, shifting frontier. Wizards and Muggles lived as neighbors, sometimes as friends, often as wary strangers. Magical enclaves were woven directly into the fabric of the non-magical world, with villages like Godric's Hollow in the West Country and Ottery St. Catchpole on the south coast of England, being home to both magical and Muggle families, living side by side. This coexistence was messy, unpredictable, and varied wildly from place to place. In some parts of the world, particularly within certain Native American communities, witches and wizards were not only accepted, but lauded. Their magical abilities in healing and animal lore made them respected figures, medicine men, and outstanding hunters who were integral to the survival and prosperity of their tribes. In Europe, however, the relationship was far more strained. As the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance, a growing suspicion began to curdle the tolerance of the past. Even so, interaction was commonplace. Powerful and ancient wizarding families like the Malfoys actively fraternized with Muggle aristocracy. Long before they became champions of pure-blood supremacy, they curried favor with Muggle royalty, using their magical influence to acquire wealth, land, and power in the non-magical sphere. Their opposition to the eventual Statute of Secrecy was born not of ideological purity, but from a pragmatic fear of losing access to this enjoyable and profitable social life. While Muggles were largely confined by geography, the wizarding world was already a global community. Long before the age of steam or flight, witches and wizards were in contact with their counterparts across continents. Brooms, apparition, and premonitions meant that magical communities in Europe, Africa, and the Americas knew of each other's existence and shared knowledge across vast distances. This pre-existing international network was crucial, for it meant that when the crisis came, they could respond as one. But the government that presided over this era of open secrets was ill-equipped for a crisis. In Britain, before the Ministry of Magic, there was the Wizards' Council. This body was less a government and more an archaic, decentralized, and often comically incompetent assembly of elders. Its history is a litany of failures. It proved utterly incapable of establishing a working legal definition for beasts and beings, leading to chaotic summits where goblins, in a spectacular display of malicious compliance, brought trolls and hags to the council chambers to prove the absurdity of the laws. The council also struggled to contain the explosive popularity of Quidditch. As the sport grew, so did the instances of Muggles witnessing matches. The Council's response was a series of increasingly desperate decrees, banning games within 50 miles of a town, then 100, and finally declaring that Quidditch should not be played anywhere near any place where there is the slightest chance that a Muggle might be watching. These rules were largely ignored, demonstrating the Council's profound lack of enforcement power. Its handling of goblin rebellions and werewolf uprisings was similarly inept, often leading to the resignation of its leaders and a worsening of the conflicts. This history of governmental failure is not merely a colorful footnote. It was a direct precondition for what was to come. A law as sweeping and absolute as the International Statute of Secrecy, one that would require global coordination, the systematic concealment of every magical creature on the planet, and a program of memory modification on an industrial scale was utterly impossible to enforce under such a weak and fractured system. The very idea of the statute was unthinkable without a new kind of power to back it up. The decision to hide, therefore, was simultaneously a decision to abandon the old, ineffective ways and forge a new, centralized, and far more authoritarian form of governance. The ministries of magic were not yet born, but their necessity was being written in the failures of the Wizards' Council. A new power structure, born of crisis, was on the horizon, one that would later prove just as susceptible to corruption and bureaucratic inertia as the council it replaced. The uneasy coexistence of the two worlds began to shatter as the Muggle world entered an age of profound change. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment brought with them the rise of scientific reasoning, a worldview that had little room for the inexplicable. What was once accepted as a part of the world's mystery now became a source of fear and superstition. Muggles grew terrified of magic, and this fear was compounded by a tragic irony. They were exceptionally bad at recognizing it. This led to the brutal persecution of countless innocent, non-magical people who were swept up in the hysteria alongside the very real witches and wizards they were accused of being. The European witch hunts of the 14th century and beyond marked a dark turning point. For a fully trained adult wizard, the threat of being burned at the stake was, in some cases, a mere inconvenience. The flame-freezing charm could render the fire's touch a gentle, tickling sensation, as the famously eccentric Gwendolyn the Weird proved by allowing herself to be caught and burned 47 times in various disguises. But this charm was not a universal shield. The true danger of the witch hunts lay in their threat to the most vulnerable members of the magical community. It was a threat to magical children whose uncontrolled bursts of magic could expose them and their families. A child like Ariana Dumbledore, attacked by Muggle boys who saw her performing magic, could be left broken for life. It was a threat to any witch or wizard caught by surprise, ambushed by a mob, or stripped of their wand before they could defend themselves. The constant, gnawing fear of discovery, of a neighbor's suspicion or a child's mistake, created a society living under perpetual threat. This simmering pot of fear and violence boiled over in the New World. The Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693 became the ultimate catalyst, the event that pushed the wizarding world to its breaking point. The situation in North America was uniquely volatile. The environment was harsher, amenities were few, and the dominant Puritan religious beliefs fostered a deep and violent intolerance of anything deemed occult. But the greatest danger came not from the Muggles, or No-Majs, as they were known in America, but from within the wizarding world itself. America at this time was a magical frontier, lacking an established system of law enforcement. This vacuum was filled by the Scourers, a ruthless, multinational band of wizarding mercenaries who were initially tasked with hunting down magical criminals. They quickly became corrupt, indulging in cruelty and bloodshed far beyond their mission. They hunted wizards for bounties, but also began trafficking their own kind, and most despicably, framing innocent nomads as witches to collect rewards from the gullible and terrified populace. The Salem witch trials were the horrifying culmination of this convergence. Wizarding historians agree that among the so-called Puritan judges were at least 2 known Scourers, who used the trials to settle personal feuds and enrich themselves. The trials became a monstrous fusion of No-Maj hysteria and wizarding corruption. Real witches died alongside innocent No-Majs, all condemned by a court manipulated by the magical world's own worst elements. This reveals a crucial truth about the Great Persecution. The threat was not purely external. It was amplified by a catastrophic internal failure. The wizarding world, through the actions of the Scourers, was complicit in stoking the very flames that threatened to consume it. The Scourers' practice of framing No-Majs fueled the paranoia and convinced the non-magical community that witches were everywhere, hiding behind every face. The Statute of Secrecy, therefore, was not just a shield against Muggle violence. It was an act of profound self-recrimination, an admission that the magical community could not control its own corrupt members, and had to withdraw from the world to prevent them from causing further harm. It is no coincidence that the Magical Congress of the United States of America, or MACUSA, was founded in 1693, with one of its first and most urgent tasks being to hunt down and bring the Scourers to justice. The magical world had to clean its own house before it could build a wall around it. With the fires of Salem still smoldering, the wizarding world faced an existential choice. The old ways of scattered communities and porous borders were no longer tenable. The final straw for many in Britain was a failed diplomatic mission in 1690. A delegation of wizards approached the newly crowned Muggle monarchs, William and Mary, to request official protection under Muggle law. They were refused. The message was clear. They were on their own. In 1692, an emergency summit of the International Confederation of Wizards was convened. This was the global parliament of the magical world, and on its floor, the fate of their civilization would be decided. The debate was fierce, splitting the community into 2 main factions. On one side were the militants, the extremists who argued for open war. Theirs was an argument of power and pride. Why should those gifted with magic hide from those who had none? Why cower in fear when they possessed the power to rule? They saw Muggles as a threat to be subjugated, not a populace to hide from. On the other side was the faction that argued for secrecy. They presented a more pragmatic, if somber, view. An open war, they contended, was ultimately unwinnable. While a single wizard was far more powerful than a single Muggle, the sheer numerical superiority of the non-magical world was overwhelming. They could not kill every Muggle, and a state of perpetual conflict would be unsustainable, dooming them to a future of endless violence. The only true path to safety, to peace, and to the preservation of their way of life was to withdraw completely. Prominent figures, such as Ralston Potter, a member of the Wizengamot, championed this cause. There were also those who opposed the statute for reasons of pure self-interest. The Malfoy family, having built their fortune and status on their close ties to Muggle nobility, fought fervently against a law that would sever those profitable connections and force them to abandon a sphere of influence they greatly enjoyed. In the end, the choice was made. The wider community, exhausted by centuries of persecution and yearning for security above all else, voted for secrecy. The International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy was signed in 1689 and put into full, binding effect in 1692. This decision was not a tyrannical edict handed down from on high. It was a democratic choice, a social contract forged in the crucible of fear. This popular mandate is key to understanding why the statute became so deeply ingrained in wizarding culture for the next 300 years. However, this democratic origin also created a permanent political fault line within their society. The minority who lost that debate, the militants and pure-blood supremacists who believed in the doctrine of magic is might, never truly accepted the outcome. They were forced to comply, but their resentment festered in the new, isolated world the statute created. This lingering bitterness, this sense that their right to rule had been stolen from them by a fearful majority, would become the ideological bedrock for the dark wizards of the future. Gellert Grindelwald's cry for wizards to step out of the shadows and take their rightful place, and Lord Voldemort's war to subjugate the Muggles, were not new ideas. They were the echoes of a debate lost 3 centuries earlier, a political wound that never healed. The decision to hide was one thing. The execution was a logistical and magical undertaking of staggering proportions. It required nothing less than erasing an entire, globally connected society from the memory of the world and creating the infrastructure to maintain that invisibility forever. The first and most immediate consequence was a complete overhaul of wizarding governance. The old, ineffectual Wizards' Council was swept away. In its place rose new, highly structured, and powerful centralized governments. In America, Makusa was founded in 1693, its immediate priority being to deal with the Scourer threat. In Britain, the modern Ministry of Magic was formally established in 1707, with its first minister, Ulick Gamp, tasked with policing a frightened community adjusting to a life in hiding. These new governments immediately created a vast bureaucracy of secrecy. Entirely new departments were formed, each with a specific role in maintaining the veil. The Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes became the first line of defense, containing the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad to clean up magical mishaps, and the Muggle-worthy Excuse Committee, whose job was to invent plausible, non-magical explanations for everything from collapsed bridges to freak hurricanes. At the heart of this new machine were the Obliviators. An entire corps of specialists was trained in the delicate and ethically fraught art of the memory charm. Their solemn duty was to find any Muggle who had witnessed magic and carefully, precisely modify their memory, erasing the impossible and leaving behind a mundane, forgettable explanation. This was the Great Forgetting, a silent, sweeping campaign to edit magic out of the collective consciousness of the Muggle world. The task extended to the natural world as well. The Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures was given the monumental job of concealing every magical beast on the planet, from relocating dragon nesting grounds to remote, unplottable locations, to convincing Muggles that the Loch Ness Monster was a log and the Yeti was a trick of the light. Their work was endless. The task was so immense that in 1750, Clause 73 was added to the statute, making each national ministry officially responsible for hiding the creatures within its borders, under penalty of sanction from the International Confederation of Wizards. Life for the average witch and wizard was transformed. A host of new laws governed their existence. Performing magic in front of a Muggle became a serious offense, punishable by the ministry. There were, of course, exceptions for life-threatening situations, a clause that would prove critical for a certain young wizard centuries later. Wizards were now required to dress in Muggle attire when in public to avoid drawing attention, and they were forbidden from participating in Muggle sports. In America, the laws went even further. The trauma of the Salem trials and a subsequent major breach of secrecy led to the passing of Rappaport's Law in 1790, which enforced strict segregation, forbidding any fraternization and especially marriage between wizards and nomads. This law remained in effect until 1965, creating a deep cultural divide between the more integrated European wizards and their deeply isolated American counterparts. Finally, the very architecture of the wizarding world was remade. Magical spaces were hidden in plain sight. Hogwarts Castle was layered with enchantments so that any approaching Muggle would see only a crumbling, dangerous ruin with "keep out" signs. Entire wizarding districts like Diagon Alley were tucked away behind magical entrances, like the back wall of the Leaky Cauldron, making them completely inaccessible to the uninitiated. This massive undertaking had a profound and perhaps unforeseen consequence. In order to enforce the statute, the ministry had to be able to monitor the use of magic everywhere. This led to the creation of powerful and intrusive legal mechanisms, effectively turning the wizarding world into a surveillance state. The most notable of these is the Trace, an enchantment placed upon all underage witches and wizards that reports any magical activity around them to the ministry. While its stated purpose was to prevent breaches of secrecy, it also gave the ministry an unprecedented ability to monitor and control its youngest citizens. The Ministry's technology could detect that magic had been performed in a specific location, even if it couldn't determine who had cast the spell. This ambiguity gave them broad powers of accusation and prosecution, as Harry Potter discovered during his sham trial for casting a Patronus. The entire legal framework of their society shifted. It was no longer simply about governing a people. It was about policing a secret. In this new world order, individual liberties were a small price to pay for the greater good of remaining hidden. The International Statute of Secrecy achieved its primary goal. It brought an end to the widespread persecution and gave the wizarding world a measure of safety it had not known for centuries. But this safety came at a steep price. In building their sanctuary, they had also constructed a gilded cage, and the long-term consequences of their self-imposed exile would prove to be as corrosive as the Muggle threat they had fled. The most immediate effect was a profound cultural stagnation. By cutting themselves off from the non-magical world, wizards became frozen in time, clinging to traditions and technologies from the 17th century. Their ignorance of Muggle life became legendary. Witches and wizards, even those in high-ranking ministry positions like Arthur Weasley, were baffled by the most basic Muggle concepts, from currency and plumbing to the function of a rubber duck. This ignorance was a source of comedy, but it reflected a deeper intellectual and social isolation. They had no need for Muggle inventions like electricity or computers, because magic could do it all. But in their pride, they failed to see that the Muggle world was progressing, innovating, and changing in ways they could no longer comprehend. Far more sinister was the ideological rot that set in. The Statute of Secrecy became the incubator for modern pure-blood supremacy. Before the statute, fraternizing with Muggles was common, even among the elite. After, it became a taboo. The constant, state-sanctioned fear of Muggles created a deep-seated societal paranoia. In this climate of fear, Muggle-born witches and wizards, born to non-magical parents, came to be seen in a new, dangerous light. They were no longer just a curious anomaly. They were a bridge to the world they had fled, a potential security risk, a crack in the Great Wall of Secrecy. This fear and isolation allowed the old fringe prejudices of figures like Salazar Slytherin to fester. What was once the view of an extremist minority slowly metastasized into a powerful and pervasive political ideology, poisoning the heart of the society the statute was meant to protect. Of course, not everyone accepted this new world order quietly. Over the centuries, dissenters rose to challenge the statute from all sides of the political spectrum. There was the activist Carlotta Pinkstone, who campaigned tirelessly in the early 20th century to have the statute repealed. She believed wizards had a right to live openly and was imprisoned numerous times for deliberately performing magic in front of Muggles to make her point. And then there were the dark wizards. The statute, designed to bring peace, inadvertently created the perfect grievance for them to exploit. Gellert Grindelwald's entire ideology was built around overthrowing the statute. He argued with terrifying charisma that the law was a chain, forcing the magically superior to scuttle like rats in the gutter, while the inferior Muggles ruled the world. His slogan, "For the greater good," was a direct call to shatter the veil and establish a new world order with wizards as the rightful masters. Lord Voldemort, while sharing the same supremacist beliefs, took a different approach. He did not initially seek to repeal the statute. Instead, he weaponized it. His followers' attacks on Muggles, the collapsing bridges, the mysterious deaths, the freak weather, were acts of terror designed to stretch the Ministry's resources to the breaking point. Every Obliviator sent to clean up a mess was one less Auror available to fight his Death Eaters. He used the statute as a shield, consolidating his power within the hidden magical world, knowing the Ministry was too preoccupied with maintaining secrecy to mount an effective resistance. The very law designed to protect the wizarding world had, over time, become its greatest vulnerability. It fostered an environment of ignorance and prejudice, creating an echo chamber where supremacist ideologies could grow unchecked. It created a deep-seated cultural resentment that Dark Lords could masterfully exploit for recruitment, framing their campaigns of conquest as movements of liberation. The statute gave them a powerful and emotive cause to break the chains of secrecy and reclaim their supposed birthright. The Gilded Cage had not only kept Muggles out, it had trapped the wizarding world with its own worst demons. And so we arrive at the legacy of that fateful decision in 1692. The International Statute of Secrecy undeniably saved the wizarding world from the immediate threat of persecution. It allowed them to build a society in peace, to live without the constant fear of the stake and the mob. But that peace was bought at the cost of progress, of understanding, and of connection to the wider human race. It created a society that was culturally isolated, institutionally prejudiced, and dangerously ignorant of the world beyond its magical borders. For 300 years, the veil has held. The complex machinery of concealment charms, obliviators, and Muggle-worthy excuses has, against all odds, worked. But the world of the 21st century presents a challenge that the founders of the statute could never have conceived. The old methods of erasing the memories of a few eyewitnesses seem hopelessly quaint in an age of the internet, of satellite surveillance, of global data networks, and of billions of smartphones, each capable of capturing and sharing an image with the entire world in an instant. The Great Wall of Secrecy, built of magic and fear, is now besieged not by an army, but by information. The greatest threat to the wizarding world's hidden existence may no longer be a dark wizard with a thirst for power, or a dragon escaping its sanctuary. It may simply be a single Muggle, in the right place at the wrong time, with a good Wi-Fi connection. The day magic went into hiding was a day of survival. The question that now hangs in the quiet air is whether the day it is rediscovered will be one of peaceful integration or of catastrophic annihilation. A question to ponder as you drift into the quiet of the night.